From WAMU 88.5 at American University in Washington, welcome to the Politics Hour starring Tom Sherwood. I'm Kojo Nandi. Tom Sherwood is our resident analyst. He's a reporter with NBC4 and a columnist with the current newspapers. Later in the broadcast, we'll be joined by John Cook, who's a Fairfax County supervisor. First, Tom Sherwood, welcome. What's that little sticker you're wearing on your shirt?
It says, I voted early. You know, I don't care who people vote for, but I think people should vote. People have died for the right to vote. And if it's the only exercise you do, exercise your right to vote.
So there are two different kinds of stickers. One that says, I voted early, and then if you happen to vote on voting day itself, you just get one saying, I voted?
That's correct.
What if I vote real early in the morning on that day? Would I get, I voted early?
Don't start questioning the bureaucracy. Just make sure you vote. You haven't voted yet?
No, I have not. I
was out in Prince George's County. You know, yesterday was the first day of voting, early voting in Maryland. Of course, Virginia doesn't have it. But there were thousands of people at the Wayne Curry Sports and Education Center.
Yes.
So much so that some of the older and infirm people couldn't stand in line for 2 hours. Some of them went home. It was kind of sad. Rashawn Baker's office said they were going to look into that, try to make sure that doesn't happen again, the rest of early voting.
Well, for the rest of us, voting day is on November 8th. That's the day on which I actually plan on voting. You were quite busy this week. One of the things you did was that you covered the grand opening of the Trump International Hotel in Washington, which may be as noteworthy for who was there or for who was not there as for who was there. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, they did the ceremonial ribbon cutting, and the only people were Donald Trump and his family members. You know, 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, when the groundbreaking was done to redo the hotel, which I must say looks very nice on the lobby level. Then Councilmember Muriel Bowser was there as the chairman of the Economic Development Committee. Mayor Gray was there, other city officials. None of them went this time. And Mayor Bowser was pretty blunt about it. She says, you know, I'm a Democrat. I support Hillary Clinton. I support economic development, but I don't want to be part of the Trump politics. And, of course, Trump has used that hotel several times for political statements, and he did so again.
Well,
it was interesting. Let me just say briefly, the demonstrations out front lasted for a long time. There were a few Trump supporters who were out there, but mostly it was the people you would expect, saying that Trump has disqualified himself to be president, and they don't like the fact that he has that hotel and is using it for political purposes.
Where Mayor Bowser was that afternoon, along with our next guest, who was not at the Trump opening, was in my backyard, which, as you know, I live a very short block away from the old Walter Reed campus, and that's where they were, apparently for the city taking ownership of the former Walter Reed campus. The individual I refer to who was also there is Eleanor Holmes Norton. She's a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. She's a Democrat representing the District of Columbia. She joins us by phone. Congresswoman Norton, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's good to be with you, Kojo.
But you were not with Donald Trump this week when he had the grand opening of his hotel. How come?
Well, of all people, you would have thought I would be there. After all, it was my bill, just as the Walter Reed opening was my bill. And I was there and wasn't at the Trump opening. Look, when Trump hurts his brand, as he is with his presidential campaign, he is hurting D.C. and D.C. revenue and federal revenue. Now, I have to assume he won this hotel fair and square because there's no politics in GSA. They have civil servants to, in fact, receive the offers from competitors, and every hoteler from across the country wanted to be a part of this. And he won, probably because he put more money down. You know, this is federal property, and it still is federal property, and it had to be renovated. And he accepted the deal that the government gave. Since it took me 10 years to get this bill, and it's one of the most iconic properties underdeveloped or undeveloped in the District of Columbia, you bet your dollar that I would have wanted to be there. But Trump has made it impossible for me to be there. and for, I think, any elected official in the district to be there, because he's politicized his brand, hurt his brand. Those hotel rooms now, and this was to be the first truly luxury hotel in the District of Columbia, are going for under half of what they were advertised for. And of course, he's hurting his brand here, and he's hurting his brand across the world. But what matters to us is what he does here. So it would have been very inappropriate, whether or not you supported Trump, it seems to me, to have been a part of this opening. He used it, saying he was opening on time and under budget, to show what he would do as president of the United States. Now, if that isn't politicizing...
Oh, and he said a lot more than that. Ms. Norton, this is Tom Sherwood. Thank you very much for joining us today. I think you started out on something very important, which people may care about more so than whether Trump's hotel will do well. Some think it'll do fine once he's over, the election's over, and we get beyond this year. But you put in the bill that allowed that property to be transferred to or to be developed, because it sat terribly since the bicentennial. But more than that, you also have been the person on the Hill who's gotten the whole the southeast waterfront, the Navy Yard where the ballpark is, the Yards Park is. You were part of the effort with Mayor Williams to get all of this of the wharf area in southeast.
It's probably easier to name things she has not been a part of. But go ahead.
I wonder, does your staff keep track of how many acres of formerly wasted federal land that you've turned over to the city, which is now being developed?
I'm going to tell they ought to do that, because the two places you just named, the southeast waterfront, the southwest waterfront, are adding not only land mass but economic development. They're going to be developing those, and a lot of development has come online already, for the next 10 years each side. We need all the land we can get.
And this has been done with what Republican and Democratic administrations. It's not just been Democrats passing this land around.
Oh, it's almost always Republican administrations, because the president has sometimes been Democratic, but I don't think more than 6 of my more than 25 years in Congress have had Democrats in charge. But, Tom, it is possible sometimes to get people to work with you on matters that no matter how hard you try, you can't extract any ideological matter from them. And the land that I've gotten for the district, and is also land for the federal government that they are making revenue from. So what's to be against?
Well, I just want to say I moved to Southwest Washington 9 years ago because I saw what was happening on the Southwest waterfront. So as a citizen of the city, I thank you. As a reporter, I'll keep looking for the flaws in it.
I know you'll find some.
If you have questions or comments for Eleanor Holmes Norton, give us a call at 800-433-8850. Send email to kojo@wamu.org. Shoot us a tweet at Kojo Show, or go to our website, kojoshow.org. Watch the live video stream. Ask a question or comment there. As most people know by now, a new Amazon original series called Good Girls Revolt features Eleanor Holmes Norton's work as a young civil rights lawyer in the late 60s. You organized a group of female researchers at a weekly news magazine and eventually helped them sue to be allowed to be able to become reporters and writers. How did you get involved in that issue at Newsweek magazine in real life?
Well, actually, I didn't organize them. They organized themselves to come to me to ask whether they should sue Newsweek for sex discrimination. All of them were researchers, whereas men they'd known in college were brought in as reporters. Yet they were very tentative in their approach. As far as I know, Kojo, there hadn't been any major class action by women when Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed, and I had no idea that I'd go on to chair that commission. When that was passed, the first people, and for a long time the only people who took advantage of it, were African Americans who had a long history of discrimination. So women didn't quite understand in the beginning the role that the civil rights laws played for them, and so they needed their consciences raised. So these women came, and this Good Girls Revolt Amazon flick is really about how they got up their gumption to be among, frankly, the most courageous women in the United States, because journalism then was at its apex. This was a major news magazine. I had no risk. I'm a civil rights lawyer. My conscience is well enough raised The only risk was with these women.
Were you employed by Newsweek? You weren't were actually employed.
No, she was probably an ACLU attorney at the time. Were you an ACLU
Exactly.
attorney?
Wait,
Exactly.
you were
I'm the opposite of Newsweek. I'm the
you were-
opponent. I'm the
okay,
one that's
so-
going to sue Newsweek.
Okay, there was some confusion. Somebody thought you had worked for Newsweek. I didn't think you had ever worked on my side of the business in journalism.
Well, at that
No.
time, you were, according to the other women on screen in this series, quite intimidating. The series is based on the book by Lynn Povich, The Good Girls Revolt. This is how Lynn Povich, who was one of those female researchers at Newsweek, described you back in those days at a meeting between the women researchers and the senior editors of the magazine, including Oz Elliott, then editor of Newsweek.
When we got to the meeting, in walks Eleanor Holmes Norton, who is about 5'7". She's 5 months pregnant. She has a gigantic afro. She's African American. And the editors of Newsweek really made their reputation on covering the civil rights movement. They were the most progressive editors. They believed in civil rights. And here they are confronted with an African American pregnant lawyer on the other side. And Oz starts the meeting by saying, I have invited you here today because I really want to know why you didn't come to me first. And Eleanor said, excuse me, Mr. Elliott, this is our meeting. I will do the talking.
And she hasn't stopped since. Eleanor
Stop it.
Eleanor Holmes Norton, they found you intimidating. Was that accurate? Did you want to come off as intimidating?
Wait, before she answers, she still is intimidating. Just wait till you mess around with anything she's trying to do and you don't get it right.
This is true.
Now go ahead.
No, the only people I try to intimidate, and I'm afraid I haven't succeeded, are Republicans these days. The woman, by the way, that you heard, that you just broadcast.
Lynn Povich, another Washingtonian.
From a well-known family here. The Povich family. Her father was a great sports writer for
Shirley
the Washington
Povich.
Post. Yes. And by the way, these women had that kind of pedigree. They were Phi Beta Kappas and Fulbright scholars. And
Miss Norton, we're asking you about you being terrifying.
Thank you.
Intimidating.
To these.
You're pivoting, I'm
the point
sorry.
was not to be intimidated by the so-called, remember what we called it at that time, the power structure. This was the economic power structure. And to let them know that we were prepared to take them on. And look who was the publisher of Newsweek, Katharine Graham.
Exactly
By the
right.
way, she had her consciences raised, of Washington Post publisher. She had her consciences raised. She and I became good friends after this.
I've started watching the series myself, Good Girls Revolt. I find it fascinating. How did you find it?
I haven't even. I've seen a pilot. I've seen a bit with me in it. I must tell you, what I most revel about this, Joy Bryant, this gorgeous woman playing me. I never looked like that. I wish I had.
Well, you actually read the scripts, though, to give them consulting advice. That's right, isn't it?
I did, although I must tell you that this is fiction. It is not a documentary. It is basically what happened, but of course they had to make it interesting.
Well, can I ask one question, economic development question? Were you a paid consultant?
Oh, of course not.
No, too bad.
And I was the kind of
You
consultant
missed an
who didn't
opportunity.
have,
Well,
and I was the kind of consultant that didn't have, veto power either.
Well, before we move on, I mentioned something else in our billboard that other people may not have known about you, that as an ACLU attorney, you once represented Alabama's segregationist governor, George Wallace. How did that come about?
That came about because when George Wallace ran for president, John Lindsay denied him the right to speak at Shea Stadium, a public facility. And when they came to the Wallace people came to the New York Civil Liberties Union. I work for the American Civil Liberties Union. And they came up and asked, Eleanor, do you want to represent him? I have represented all kinds of people. I represent racists. I believe in the First Amendment. So I said, George Wallace? Wow. I got to represent him in Queens Supreme Court. And I must say his aides, when they saw me, young black woman attorney who was there, I told them to argue only the First Amendment part here. They could not have been more gracious. I don't know who these people were. They were Princeton-educated Brahmin from the South. But it was a slam dunk. We won the case very easily, and I think With or without me, we would have done it.
He was suing the city of New York under Mayor Lindsay, and you represented him. Didn't you also become Human Rights Commissioner in New York under the aforementioned Mayor Lindsay?
Kojo, I think it was on the strength of having sued him that he reached out to make me the Human Rights Commissioner, to ask me to be the Human Rights Commissioner of New York City. I think, in part, because New York City was going through great turmoil. I don't know if you remember the Ocean Hill-Brownsville.
Of
there
course.
were blacks against Jews. And he wanted somebody who I think was willing to take on all sides and did not hold against you what somebody said was your background. And in the case of racists, whom I had the opportunity to represent also in the Supreme Court of the United States, I didn't hold against them. I did hold against them what they were saying, but I certainly believe they had the right to say it.
Well, can I just one last question on going back to the show, Good Girls Who Vote itself. Even today, all these many years later, there's a certain sexism. Well, there is a sexism in the world, whether it's the politics of the country, where if a female candidate is too loud, she is seen as shrill. If a female candidate is too quiet, she's seen as weak. And how would you rate the progress this country has made in terms of accepting women as leaders in the country, whether it's in the boardroom or the maybe possibly president of the United States?
I do think that Hillary Clinton encountered that more in her first run than this run. But I think it's still that kind of, in some parts of the country, that kind of world for female candidates. And I'm very pleased to represent the District of Columbia. When I ran, there was more than one woman running. And we've never had that hang up. But
even in the business community,
women have to be careful.
In the business community, it's still a significant issue.
It still
in
is
terms of the boardrooms and the CEOs.
And it still is a significant issue in some parts of journalism, notwithstanding the Newsweek case.
On to statehood, our guest is Eleanor Holmes Norton. She's a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. She represents the District of Columbia. If you have questions or comments for her, give us a call at 800-433-8850. You've been in the fight for district autonomy from the beginning, and back in 1993, you got the only House of Representatives vote on D.C. statehood, and there was another attempt in 2014. Neither of those were successful, but we're trying again. In just over a week, D.C. residents will vote on a draft of a D.C. Constitution and a new name for the proposed states. Well, first, what do you think of the name, State of Washington, D.C.?
Frederick.
Well, I must say I was consulted on that one. I'm afraid they are going to confuse Washington, official Washington, with hometown Washington, because it sounds like, for most people, Washington, D.C. means official Washington. I think they were trying because they don't like New Columbia, to think of a way that still keep people understanding it's us. So I think there will be some confusion there. I think a name, whatever it is, and I really have no preference, and I think it's very difficult to come up with a name that distinguishes hometown Washington from official Washington, really is important. And most people will not be able to tell the difference, because it'll still be Washington, D.C., even though it's Douglas Commonwealth.
It is unfortunate that across the country and even in the near burbs, people confuse our city of real American citizens with official White House or congressional policy in the federal government, and we get lumped in all together.
The Branding Greater Washington Task Force is trying to change that.
That name is even too long.
They're trying to change that. They say we need to step out of the shadow of the federal government because we represent a lot more than that. So they're planning to launch a regional rebranding campaign next year. Congresswoman Norton, what do you think about that? Think we need to be rebranded?
Well, for the entire region, no. For the region, it matters to be the nation's capital region. But for the district, if you want to be a state, you don't want to be confused with official Washington. So I think that's the big difference. If you are the national capital region, you have a lot to gain by being associated with the nation's capital. Mostly, frankly, tourism, the iconic monuments and mall here. We get 20 million visitors a year, and many of them go out, in fact, take hotels in Maryland and Virginia. But now I'm not sure what they mean by rebranding, since, frankly, the region lives off of official Washington.
Well, just one little example. We have the Marine Corps Marathon this coming weekend. It's in suburban Virginia, and it's in the District of Columbia. We give up our streets for this marathon, which is a great thing. However, for a business reason, the marathon has decided to hold its expo with 200 vendors down in suburban Maryland at the National Harbor. People tend in the region, as you were just suggesting, they want to feed off the idea that we are the nation's capital, but then the money goes to Richmond. Any money that's spent at National Harbor, taxes will go to Richmond for the state of Virginia. We get zero money from that. I do think we need to brand our city as a real place, not just the White House and the Congress.
So important.
Although we don't know what...
In fact, National Harbor, by the way, was invented to feed off of the tourism that comes to the District of Columbia.
And everybody I know who's gone there has said, "Well, wait a minute, I thought I was going to be in Washington." Can we go back to statehood for a moment?
Yeah, and I'd like Peter in Washington to take us there. Peter, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Well, I'm very pleased to be able to talk with you and with Mrs. Norton. I'm a very strong proponent, advocate of statehood, have been for years and years. And I'm also very grateful to Mrs. Norton for her tremendous job in defending and representing us in D.C. But I'm going to be voting no on the statehood referendum,
Why?
and I'll try to quickly tell you why. The referendum is so misstructured. I mean, it's got many things wrong with it, but let me say quickly the major things. It asks 4 questions, as you know. But you can't answer them separately. You have to say yes to the whole package or no to the whole package. One of the things in there is about the Constitution, which the City Council essentially wrote. And I think it's entirely wrong for there to be a Constitution attached to the statehood referendum. Other states have come into the Union doing their Constitution after being admitted, and that's what we should be doing.
Well, last week the D.C. Council voted to move forward with a constitutional convention. What do you think about that?
Because that will come supposedly in 2 years, maybe. But we would be going into the position of statehood with the Constitution that they wrote. And
Okay.
it's a terrible Constitution.
Well, you had a lot of reasons, but we don't have a lot of time. So allow me...
Ms. Norton's going to respond to that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
because I think what the city is trying to do, it perhaps took on too much in too short a period of time. They tried the Tennessee plan, and you had to have a constitution, the boundaries, etc., and then you petition the government, the federal government, and they give you statehood. I don't think anybody believes that's really going to happen, but it's a very good device for raising consciousness nationally and within the city about statehood. And of course, as you said, Kojo, the council is allowing for a constitution afterwards. We don't expect that the first thing Hillary Clinton does when she becomes the next president is going to give us statehood, because it would take not only her but the entire Congress. The reason that they did all of this beforehand is that they were trying a device that had worked for Tennessee. You are right that most states come into the Union, they do the Constitution and everything afterwards. But we were trying to do, or they were trying to do, because this comes from the city, and I applaud the city for at least raising the issue to a new level internally. They were trying to take a plan, to bring it to the attention so that if there was a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president, they could begin to move forward whether or not they were successful.
And Ms. Norton, my suggestion has been that and even Tom Davis has from Virginia has said, we need a political action committee that's really funded. Maybe you could use your power, with some good girls going bad on this, and maybe to have President Obama and Eric Holder host a fundraiser and create a political action committee that can get the message out to other members of Congress about where we stand as a
But those are the kind of
state.
bright ideas, not to members of the Congress, but to the nation.
Or the nation at whole.
large.
Just have an advertising campaign that talks to other than those of us right here in town.
Absolutely. You know, we could do it with social
can be the
media. We
chairperson.
haven't organized ourselves to do it in the ways that modern technology allows you to do.
Money speaks.
Well, we had a caller who couldn't stay on the line, B from Great Falls, Virginia, who asks, no one in Congress is talking about Donald Trump's potential conflicts of interest if he becomes president between his businesses and his duties as president. Please ask the Congresswoman to comment.
Huge, talking about huge issue, to use his term. I don't even know. Remember, this is not an ordinary corporation. Essentially, he fancies it a family corporation, and he says the children would run it. He wouldn't run it. Well, of course, that's him running it. What you have to do if you have a business, Mitt Romney will tell you this, is you put your holdings away from you in what is known as a blind trust. He's not going to do that. He hasn't even promised to do that.
Well, what will
he
Ms.
is so entangled around the world that I don't even see how he could untangle himself to become president, because it's too family centered, and he'd have to disentangle himself and his children from the corporation.
And what should Mrs. Clinton, should she become president, as you expect, should do about the charity that's gotten so much controversy?
Well, I must tell you, I don't think the Clinton Foundation, for all the good it's done, is worth the trouble it's been causing. And I think they need to disconnect themselves also from that foundation. And if they don't, I'm on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, they will see nothing but hearings on that Clinton Foundation. So to the extent, and they've done something already, it isn't nearly enough.
Have you voted yet?
They can disentangle themselves from it now. If they want to take it back on afterwards, fine.
Have you voted yet?
I haven't, and I always wait till the day of voting to remind people that this is the last day. But could I thank you, Tom, for not only voting early, but for telling people and also vote for statehood. Of course, I'm on the ballot, but I'm saying this year, look, vote for statehood first, then vote for me.
Okay,
we need a very big vote for statehood, because if it looks like we don't have the biggest possible vote, how in the world am I going to be able to go and say, give us statehood, and they will say, says who? I think we ought to say, says everybody.
Well,
I think that's where we are. It says everybody, but we got to have that vote.
Here is Aaron in Washington, D.C. on an issue that I know the Congresswoman has raised before. Aaron, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Coach. Thank you for taking my call. I am very supportive. I'm a D.C. resident. I live in Ward 5. I'm very supportive of D.C. having representation in Congress, but I wonder why D.C. residents, unlike U.S. citizens who live in Puerto Rico and some of the outlying territories who don't pay federal taxes, why are D.C. residents forced to pay federal taxes when we don't have representation? And is anything being done working with the president to perhaps give...
As I said, this is an issue that Congresswoman Norton has raised before. I'll have her speak to it again.
Yes, we pay taxes, and that ought to be enough to give us 2 senators and a representative. Sometimes, and I've even tried this once, frankly, as a fluke, because I knew they wouldn't go for it. They say, okay, then have us pay no taxes the way the territories do. The reason I wasn't serious about that is if you pay no taxes, you also do not get per capita funding the way the states do. We get per capita funding for each and everything the states get. Our territories, like Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, do not, and they're always complaining about it. So if you don't want to get the same Medicaid and you don't want to get the same surface transportation money, then become a territory, because that's what you become. The framers at least made you something distinctive, unique. The District of Columbia, the only way to go from there is to statehood.
And thank you very much for your call, Aaron. That's about all the time we have. Congresswoman Norton, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Could I say that the Republican Party for the first time supports statehood this time, so we have a bipartisan majority in the District of Columbia for statehood. It's coming. It's coming if we work for it.
Eleanor Holmes Norton is a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. She's a Democrat representing the District of Columbia. Thank you once again for joining us.
Of course.
Tom Sherwood is our resident analyst. He's a reporter with NBC4 and a columnist with the current newspapers. Tom Sherwood, there was a debate among the candidates, or I should say between the candidates, for the U.S. Senate in Maryland this past week. It couldn't be a debate among the candidates because there were only 2 of the candidates involved. The Democratic and Republican candidate, the Green Party candidate, tried to crash the party, Margaret Flowers did, but she got on stage but never made the cut because they had You have to have the support of 15% of likely voters to participate in that. We had a similar problem here when we established floor of 10% of the voters, and so she didn't participate in the debate here too. She got what turned out to be a longer session by herself.
Right. Well, this was the University of Maryland forum with Baltimore TV station. Don't remember which one, but she was polite. She was insistent. She didn't run yelling and fighting and resisting arrest. She just stood in the middle of the stage, stated that she thought she should be a member in that forum. How else would people know what she does? We did the right thing. We invited her the next week. She had even more time to speak, and she had acknowledged she didn't really expect to win. That she was trying to build a Green Party movement. But, these debate things are very difficult. You want to educate the voters as best you can. And if you have every candidate, then you have to ask the write-in candidates, and then suddenly you have a huge stage and no one learns anything. So I think she did the right thing to gather attention for herself. But it's just not going to happen for her, and she knows it.
Joining us in studio now is John Cook. He's a Fairfax County supervisor. He's a Republican representing the Braddock District. He's chairman of the Public Safety Committee. John Cook, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
If you have questions or comments for Supervisor Cook, call 800-433-8850 or send email to kojo@wamu.org. You can watch our live video stream at our website, kojoshow.org, and participate in the conversation there, or you can send us a tweet at Kojo Show. With the big picture first, apparently there's a narrowing in the polls in the presidential race in Virginia, with Donald Trump in the latest poll within 7 points of Hillary Clinton. But the ads I see most on TV in Virginia have to do with the race for the House between Republican Representative Barbara Comstock and her Democratic challenger Lou Ann Bennett. Have you been seeing those commercials, Tom Sherwood?
I don't watch TV. I'm on TV.
Well, there have been a lot of them constantly. John Cook, how do you think that race is going to break out?
Well, I think Barbara is going to win it. I hope she does. She has done a fantastic job as a congresswoman in the 10th District. And really, in fact, there was a National Review article this morning I saw talking about her as the face of the Republican Party coming forward out of this election cycle. And I think she's well prepared to do that. Her constituent services are fantastic. When I've had issues, county issues I've need to talk to her about, she's always available, and that's what you want in your House member.
Both parties seem to think that this race can be crucial in terms of who is going to have the majority in the House of Representatives in the future, so they're piling a lot into it, Tom.
Well, I don't know about that, but she may be the future of the party, but she's also been one of a number of Republicans, I'm asking where you stand, who asked that Donald Trump, after the vulgarity of the recent weeks, that he should step aside as the candidate for president of the United States. Now, that helps her in the immediate suburbs of Washington, but her district, as you know, goes all the way out towards Winchester, and the farther out you go, you got more Trump supporters. How do you think that will play? Her calling, and I don't know, where do you stand on the Mr. Trump's campaign for president? He's way behind in Virginia.
He is behind in Virginia. I don't know how it plays for Barbara because I'm not as familiar with the western part of her district, as obviously she is. But I think she was in a position of having to make a call based on her heartfelt beliefs, and I respect that. So I think Barbara is running as an honest public servant and who is. I think forward-looking, and I very much look forward to her continuing her service in Congress.
This is why the Virginians like to have races for governor and senator in the off years from presidential elections, so you don't get all mired up. You said in 2009 when you won with its landslide of
89 votes,
89 votes, that the Republican Party is alive and well. That was 2009. Looking beyond this election into the elections of 2017, where are you?
Well, I think the Virginia Republicans are going to be very strong next year. We have 3, maybe 4 statewide races next year with primaries, open primaries and all. We have excellent candidates. Ed Gillespie is going to be an excellent candidate for governor. My friend Rob Bell is running for Attorney General. I think you're going to see the Republican Party immediately standing up within days after this election, in Virginia at least, and running new races with a lot of energy.
You can help me to sanction Tom Sherwood here. Tom mentioned earlier that Virginia doesn't have early votings. We got people who say Virginians can vote absentee in person in their local voter registrar's office on weekdays during business hours and on 2 Saturdays, October 29th and November 5th. Is that correct?
That's right. There are, I think, about 10 locations around the county where you can do early absentee voting in person, and you have to go in and give one of the 10 reasons that are, I think it's 10, that are available for voting absentee. But if you're going to be out of the district, for example, if you're going to be in the District of Columbia for work that day, then you can vote absentee. So people can certainly choose to do that. I enjoy going down on election day and voting. I just like to hang around the polls on election day and talk to people, and that's because I'm, I guess, a political junkie in my line of work. But people should do what's best for their schedule, but everybody should vote.
Take that, Tom Sherwood. Fairfax has been working on a series of police reforms in the wake of the John Gere case. That's the unarmed man who was shot by a Fairfax County police officer back in 2013. Many felt that during the investigation, the authorities were not transparent or forthcoming in that case. How do you feel?
I think people are right, and I feel that way, and many of my colleagues. Certainly, with the benefit of hindsight, we've made a lot of changes in our policy. That investigation took so much longer than the usual investigation into a police shooting that to go for a year and not be commenting to the public about what happened was really unacceptable. So we're overhauling our policies. We have changed our communication policy on the Board of Supervisors, and in the county for police cases, we now have what we call a predisposition to disclose, meaning that before it was, well, the police will talk about something if they have to under FOIA. Now it's going to be, you're going to answer the question unless there's a good reason not to. So we're correcting that. We have a great police chief who is, his word, re-engineering our police department, a new use of force policy, which is really emphasizing the de-escalation of circumstances. We're so fortunate in Fairfax County to have very low violent crime. The vast majority of times that our police officers are responding to a situation, it's not violent crime. Often it's somebody with a mental health issue, somebody with an emotional circumstance. And so we're training our police to handle those circumstances, calm people down, and then get them whatever help they may need. Part of that's our Diversion First program to provide a treatment instead of incarceration for people with mental health challenges who run into conflicts with the law. And, 1 out of 3 people in our Fairfax County Jail have a significant mental health challenge. And instead of the rotating in and out of jail process, we want to get them treatment and get them permanently back on their feet.
You've answered one of my future questions.
Well, this is part of the urbanization of what used to be a suburban area.
Yes.
A police, urban areas like the district, we had police review boards, back in the 70s or some cases the 60s. You've got more diversity in terms of how many dozens of languages are now spoken in Fairfax County. You've got congestion. You've got the rebuilding of Tyson. I mean, it's just extraordinary urbanization and the police have to adjust to all of that too.
That's right. And you're right. We speak over 150 languages in Fairfax County. We have cultures from all over the world. About a third of our population is foreign-born. So we are very urbanized. And we have a growing, we're trying to grow our commercial base. We're a commercial center. And so we have to be ready to deal with all of those things. So we're giving our police officers a lot of training in how to handle a diverse population, how to handle mental health challenges, how to be at the forefront of helping people in whatever circumstance they're in. Ultimately, the goal is that if you're in a troubled situation, I want every person in Fairfax County to feel 100% confident that when they call 911, that whoever comes is going to be able to understand their situation and help them. We have a great police department already, but it's going to be even better with these new programs.
I mentioned you're chairman of the Public Safety Committee, and you are about to create a civilian review panel. What
Yes.
would that entail? How might it work in a case like the John Gere investigation?
Right. This is going to be a panel of citizens appointed by the Board of Supervisors who are going to be able to review investigations of complaints against police officers. One of the concerns that some in the community have is they say, I'm not comfortable making a complaint about a police officer because I think that the police are going to defend their own and not investigate fully. This will provide an independent review. If that were to happen, this independent panel would look at that investigation and say, no, that investigation wasn't done right. You didn't interview these witnesses. You didn't ask these questions. And they would make a public report. And that would come to the Board of Supervisors. So I think what it's going to do is two things. One, we're going to have even better internal affairs investigations of police officers. But more importantly, our citizens are going to have confidence that those investigations are being done correctly. And we've already got a great relationship between our community and our police now, but it's going to be even better. And we need to make sure that all segments of our population have confidence in the police.
Now,
Absolutely critical.
Speaking of that, I've gotten a tweet here from someone, I don't know who it is, I won't say the name, but it says 40% of Fairfax police use of force has been against black people, who make up only 9% of the population.
That's an accurate statistic that came out just a few months ago. And that's the kind of thing as part of this, we're creating a police auditor position as well, which is a full-time professional position in the government. And I think we're going to want our auditor to look at that and find out why. It could very well be very legitimate reasons for that factual statement, but I think it's something we want to look at so that we can tell the public why that's the case.
There's a meals tax on the ballot in Fairfax County. It asks voters whether they would approve a maximum 4% tax on prepared food, with 70% earmarked for Fairfax public schools. We got an email from Jane who says, I'd like to thank Supervisor Cook for his clear thinking and straight-talking leadership in Fairfax County. He helped place the meals tax referendum on the ballot for Fairfax County residents. He's a true supporter of education, first responders, and voters. Thanks for letting us make up our own mind on this issue. What is your feeling about the issue?
I hope Jane lives in my district so I get another vote. When you win by 89, you'll take
You need
everyone.
90, yeah.
You do. Look, I certainly don't like the idea of imposing a new tax, but I also understand that our economy is not growing enough even to support the continuation of our continued services. There are some additional needs we have in our county. One is we have a teacher pay gap. Our teachers are paid about $10,000 less than teachers in surrounding jurisdictions. And if we want the best teachers in our schools, we have to at least pay the market. So we need some money for that. These new police officers that we need on the street, when you provide new police training, you got to have officers to cover them while they're in training. We have a public safety plan, a 5-year plan for more police officers and more firefighters. Those things take money. And in local government, it's not like the feds. We don't get to print the money. We don't get to pass the mandate to anybody. Those are the services that we need to provide.
Indeed, Fairfax is limited in how it can tax residents. Would there be any alternatives to a meal tax?
There isn't. See, that's the problem. The only real tax we have primarily is the real estate tax. It's almost 70% of our revenue, and it falls disproportionately on seniors and those in reduced incomes. People who, have a home that's worth a lot but don't have income to support the tax on that home. So an alternative to that is the meals tax. It's the only alternative that state law gives us. And we should recognize here, Virginia's in the top 10 in states in wealth. We're in the bottom 10 in state funding of education. We're in the bottom of 5 in state funding of human services. So the county's trying to make up for those state shortfalls because our population wants good education. We want solid human services. We want good police and fire. So we put county money into things the state ought to be doing. But the state doesn't give us the revenue sources. This is the only one we have.
This is a good time to remind people that in Virginia, in the state legislature, there's something called the Dillon Rule. The Dillon Rule is that the local jurisdictions, governments, cannot do anything unless specifically authorized by the state government. And they are woefully short. One of the issues is transportation. You know better than I anything about Northern Virginia transportation. Metro is collapsing at this moment, and Virginia and Maryland are reluctant to impose a 1% regional sales tax like the district has proposed to provide $500 million a year to operate Metro, or they're going to keep losing. Where are you on the Metro issue? I know you just don't want to raise taxes, but realistically, how does this Metro get out of its fix?
Metro is critical to the economic vitality and development of the whole region, including Fairfax County. It's the basis for our development in Tysons and Reston, the Silver Line. So we need two big things in Metro. The first thing is Metro's got to fix itself. And Paul Wiedefeld is a great manager. I had the opportunity to have dinner with him last week, and two of us happened to be at the same table, talked for about an hour. He has what it takes to get this done. We need to support him.
He just announced today there's like 100 people being laid off, and there are more layoffs to come because he's trying to right-size the force.
Yep. Hard choices to be made, difficult labor negotiations that have to be done because the personnel costs need to come down. And once the finances are set, then we know there's a huge ongoing capital need that the jurisdictions are going to have to step up to and figure out a way to pay for. We can't make the mistake that's been made for too long, which is to not fund it and then say, gee, it's breaking down. Well, you got to fix it. And so both the management has to get fixed, and then we're going to have to figure out how to pay for the capital needs.
We got a tweet from someone who says that John Cook is talking, the civilian panel that John Cook is talking about is powerless, as is the auditor. Presumably that means that neither of them have any kinds of enforcement powers in their decisions.
Well, it's unfortunate that that tweet is, I think, fails to understand that the power is the power of public disclosure. The power comes when this panel writes a report to the Board of Supervisors that's public and that says this investigation of this officer was done poorly or wasn't done at all. And now the Board of Supervisors, it's on our plate as it ought to be, publicly to be told that something wasn't done right. We're going to fix it. And at the end of the day, the buck has to stop with the elected Board of Supervisors, and we're prepared to take on that responsibility. If something's done wrong, we're going to want this auditor and the panel to tell us, and understand this is critically important. That will be a public report that we'll get. We won't hide. We can't hide. We don't want to hide. Tell the public something was done wrong, and we will fix it.
Go ahead.
Domestic violence?
Yep, that's where I was going.
I was actually stunned by these numbers in preparing for the show today. Domestic violence affects 1 in 4 homes in Fairfax County and is a leading cause of the low homicide rate in the county. Domestic violence hotlines receive over 200 calls each month, and each month more than 160 family abuse arrests are made. In a recent 2-year period, there was a 47% increase in the number of residents served by the Domestic Violence Action Center. What's going on?
You should mention that John Cook is chair of the Domestic Violence Prevention Policy and Coordinating Council.
That's right, and I opened up our annual meeting this morning on this issue. You know, this is not just Fairfax County. This is an issue that's been buried for too long. People are ashamed, afraid to talk about it, but it is 1 in 4 women are a victim of domestic violence. We have literally hundreds of children homeless in Fairfax County at this very minute, living in the woods because they have run from their homes with their moms from domestic violence. Children are permanently affected by the violence that they witness in their homes. Women are permanently affected from being the victims of violence. Even men are victim of domestic violence. So getting the word out that it's happening, it happens across the economic spectrum, across the racial spectrum, across the neighborhood spectrum. Everybody knows somebody in their family, in their neighborhood, or in their workplace who's been a victim of domestic violence. You might not know the name of that person. That person is there, and we need to correct this situation. It's a sickness in our culture, Tom, and Kojo. Talking about it is critical to getting a handle on it.
Here is Carol in Fairfax County, Virginia, who has what I would call the Tom Sherwood question. Carol, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yes, I'm a resident of Fairfax County, and I was listening to the program. And I was just wondering, Mr. Cook, if who you plan to vote for in the presidential election.
Well, everyone's going to have to make a choice this year. And what's interesting and really unfortunate in Virginia is so many people are voting against someone instead of for someone. And I think what we're going to see, unfortunately, the polls are telling us is that whoever wins is going to come into office with perhaps the lowest favorability rating of anyone to become president in a long, 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 long time. And no matter who wins, there's going to be a difficult relationship between the Congress and the president. No honeymoon period now, and that's an unfortunate circumstance. We're going to have to rebuild our political system after this very negative election.
In other words, Carol, he's not going to tell you.
That's a 45-second answer. I was looking at your resume, and I didn't realize that you had been a city lawyer, a corporation counsel, a lawyer for the District of Columbia from 1990 to 1996, I think it is.
Yes.
You were here when Marion Barry was arrested, and the sheriff.
We only have about a minute left.
What was that like? Is that why you moved to Fairfax? No, you were in Fairfax.
I wasn't. I lived in the district, and then I lived in Arlington. I'll tell you, it was a fascinating experience as a young lawyer. I was arguing big cases in federal court at the age of 30. I represented the police department in a lot of excessive force cases. So when it comes to police reform, I know a little bit about what I'm talking about. Public service is always good, but the legal experience for a young lawyer to be in court handling cases was fascinating. It was a lot of fun. And it was a good time in my career.
John Cook, he's a Fairfax County supervisor. He's a Republican representing the Braddock District. He's chairman of the Public Safety Committee and chairman of the Fairfax County, Fairfax City Interjurisdictional Committee. John Cook, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Tom Sherwood, he is our resident analyst. He's a reporter with NBC4 and a columnist with the current newspapers, and let the record show he voted today. Who did you vote for, Tom?
I want the authority to approve all future government organizations. They can't be more than 3 words.
Who did you vote for today, Tom?
I voted for a fine American citizen.
That's it for the show today, but if you're wondering about the statehood referendum that's on your ballot and what it would mean to have 2 Washington states in these United States if it passes in D.C., none other than Tom Sherwood has written a reply to address the other Washington's concerns. You can read it at kojoshow.org/blog, where you can also link to reporter Martin Ostermuhl's explainer for WAMU. Give those a read over the weekend, and then be sure to meet us back here Monday at noon. We'll be discussing the technology behind our democracy. Millions in our region will cast their votes electronically this election. We'll speak to an expert about the reliability of touchscreen machines. Plus, Virginia's election commissioner Edgardo Cortez joins us. He'll talk about plans to ensure the integrity of the Commonwealth's polling places. That's all coming up Monday at noon. John Cook, once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Tom Sherwood, you have a great weekend.
Everyone vote.
And thank you all for listening. I'm Kojo Nnamdi.
The Kojo Nnamdi Show is produced by Michael Martinez, Ingelisa Shrobsdorf, Taylor Burney, Elizabeth Weinstein, Ruth Tam, and Avery Kleinman. The engineer is Meg Bunting. Cliff Gallagher is on the phones. Podcasts of all shows and audio archives are available at our website, kojoshow.org.